The Falcons are gambling on youth and upside on defense, and will that be good enough to get this team to the postseason?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Now, if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's Locked On Falcons, we are doing part 2 of our 2-part season preview. We'll give some record predictions for all 32 NFL teams, as well as my Super Bowl pick. We'll talk about where the Falcons rank on offense and defense, plus give some statistical projections for this Falcons defense. But before we get into all of that, let's talk big picture on defense, similar to what we did in part 1, where we talked big picture on offense. And in part 1, we talked about kind of how the Falcons are making reasonably good bets on offense. And I don't know if I can say the same thing with the Falcons defense. I think there's the bets that they're making are a little bit more questionable, right? Particularly the bet on the youth movement, right? Betting on rookies to sort of impact. We have 4 defensive rookies from this past year's draft class that are expected to be major contributors. The Falcons have said from the jump that they are planning on being quote unquote intentional with playing these guys. They've already named 2 of them starters, and Billy Bowman and Xavier Watts in the secondary. And we expect big things in terms of Jalon Walker and James Pearce as being a significant part of their defensive line rotation, even if they aren't technically starters. Not to mention the 2 second-year defensive players in Ruka Roro and Brendan Dorlus at the D tackle position that the Falcons took last year that barely played as rookies, and so are essentially going into their first real NFL seasons. And the reason why this bet is somewhat questionable is the low percentage in terms of rookies impacting in a positive way. And again, this is not meant to be the end all be all of it, but one way that we can measure that we've mentioned in the past is like you go to PFF and you look at how many rookies over the last 5 years have played 500 or more snaps in their rookie seasons and earned a PFF overall defensive grade of 60 or higher, 60 basically representing in PFF's grading system as an average grade. So, how many rookies have played the majority of their team's defensive snaps and earned above average grades, and only about 10% of them over the last 5 years have done so. And so when you look at that and you say, okay, we're betting on essentially 6 rookies, the odds are only really one of these guys is going to hit. And the question, of course, is going to be, will more of these guys hit? And the Falcons, this is not the first time the Falcons have betted on rookies coming in right away and impacting. And the last time they did so, and they were able to do so, was that 2016 season where they had 4 rookies, again, on defense. And Keanu Neal, Deion Jones, Devondre Campbell, and Brian Poole. They had a couple of second-year defensive players in Vic Beasley and Grady Jarrett that were expected to be big-time contributors. Jalen Collins was another second-year player that wound up contributing by year's end after dealing with the suspension at the beginning of that season and injuries forcing him into the lineup later that year. And he even had some third-year guys like Ricardo Allen, who basically redshirted his rookie year. And so kind of 2016 was kind of his second NFL season. Rashid Hageman was another guy from that 2014 draft class that really didn't do a whole lot his first 2 years and was also a major contributor to that 2016 team down the stretch after some injuries forced him to get a lot more opportunities. And so, you look at that 2016 team that had a lot of contributions from some young players. The strength of that team obviously was their, high caliber offense, a historically great offense. And it's been fascinating to me to sort of hear a lot of the rhetoric from coming out of this team, whether it's been implicit or explicit, but a lot of the rhetoric surrounding this team seems to be basically like, hey, this is going to be our 2016 year. That in a lot of ways, our 2024 season was our 2015 year, where, that 2015 team got off to a 5-0 start, fizzled as they finished 8-8 that year. In last year's team, again, not quite the 5-0 start, but certainly you could look at that 6-3 start and then that 8-9 finish as similar capacity. And that 2016 Falcons team, obviously was able to win 11 games that year, go to the Super Bowl. Had a very potent offense, historically great, the best offense in the league, and a complementary defense with a lot of those young pieces. And so when I'm sure some of you guys hear me comparing potentially the 2025 team to that 2016 team, you're sitting there going like that, well, does that mean that we're going to be a Super Bowl contender? And I don't necessarily mean that, right? For me, at least when it comes to at least this podcast, like I'm like the Falcons have to earn the right to be part of a conversation that talks about them being a Super Bowl team, right? Like you got to go out there and prove it on the football field first before you hear me talk about this team as a Super Bowl contender. Like go out there and start the season 4-2 and beat some of these other teams that have Super Bowl aspirations. And do so definitively, not because Saquon Barkley dropped a pass or something like that, But I do think because of the comparisons that we're making, it does raise the expectations for this football team, right? And while I don't necessarily think of them as a team that is a Super Bowl contender as of yet, maybe again that changes as they play as the season wears on. But I do certainly expect and want them to be, and I'm sure many of you agree with me, for them to be a playoff team. And the question is, will they live up to that? I think a lot of that puts a lot of pressure on this regime and this team on both sides of the ball. This may be a controversial take to a lot of folks, but like you go back to that 2016 team, like I basically think that without Kyle Shanahan calling plays for that team, and having the number one offense in the league, let's say if you take Kyle Shanahan off of that and you still have a decent play caller that can produce the 10th best offense in the league, that's probably an 8-8 team instead of being a Super Bowl team, if you ask me, right? And, again, that's the type of comparison that is it fair to put this on Zach Robinson? Now, we, of course, here on this illustrious podcast, as the D-Rod zealots there are out there, we have high hopes for Zach Robinson. But again, like that's the type of pressure that we're talking about. Can you be on that level where we're not just talking about being the 10th best offense, but being even better than that? For this team to kind of reach that goal of being a definite playoff team, right? And then you look at the defensive side of the ball. When we talk about this youth movement, like, can this coaching staff maximize it, right? From new DC, Jeff Ulbrich, he's like, oh, we're going to simplify. That's going to be how we're going to get these young guys to contribute right away. And, that's very reminiscent of, the past Falcons during that Super Bowl era, not just with the youth that they had specifically in that 2016 season, but that whole notion of simplification under the Dan Quinn regime. That was a big talking point in 2019, where it was like Dan Quinn took over the play calling defense after firing Marquand Manuel after the 2018 season. And his goal was, we're going to simplify. And it didn't quite work. Right. And that to me is always the fascinating thing about when we talk about the Falcons, particularly when it talks about expectations this year. I get so much feedback from Falcon fans that are like, how can you think this about this year's team when last year they did this? And it's like, because part of it, we're not going to get into it, but like, I think a lot of people based far too much of their opinions off of last year, as opposed to some of us like myself that actually remember what happened 3 years ago, or happen to remember what happened 7 or 8 years ago, or 9 years ago, or 13 years ago. Right. And it's like, we've been around, we've seen this movie before. Now, you may not have seen this movie in 2024, but you just don't have to go back that much further to sort of see some of the Falcons doing a lot of the same things that they've done in the past. And it didn't work then. And so that is one of the reasons why I tend to be probably more skeptical than your average Falcon fan when it comes to whether or not it's going to work now. But, when it comes to this coaching staff, can they get more than one rookie, right? The expectation is one of these 6 rookies / second-year players is going to impact this year. Can they get more than that? And if they do, that proves that, hey, they may be the guys that are right for developing the talent that will be added to this defense for the future, right? If we can see this team deliver on a season that is much more reminiscent of that 2016 season with a potent offense, a complementary defense, and a playoff berth, as opposed to that 2019 season, that will also help this coaching staff, win over ownership when it comes to the end of the season, when ownership is potentially considering whether or not these guys should be, employed here in Atlanta in 2026 and beyond. So there's a lot of questions, a lot of unknowns about this team, beyond just, hey, the youth movement, is the secondary going to be improved? We saw this team get overmatched anytime they faced a offense that had more than one good wide receiver. And the Falcons are betting that, hey, we got a 5'10", 190-pound rookie safety in Billy Bowman that's going to solve that problem. We'll see. Will this pass rush be improved? That's another question mark. And now it's crazy for me to say this, given the Falcons' history, but I kind of feel like of these unknowns, that this is probably one of the ones I'm more optimistic about, just because I think with all the speed that they've added at edge, the more wide line looks, the attacking front, the stunts, the twists, that I do think this scheme is going to enhance his pass rush far more than what we've seen from previous Falcons defenses in the past. But, will that matter if they can't stop the run, right? That's a question that Jarvis Davis and myself have expressed our doubts about. It goes back to the conversation we had so often last year about down and distance, where if opposing offenses can stay on schedule on early downs, are you going to be able to get into the third and long situations where this pass rush can pin their ears back and really affect the quarterback, or are you going to be in a lot of third and shorts like we saw last year? And in a lot of ways, like overall, a lot of it is based off of volatility, right? The Falcons are really counting on a volatile defense. And I think that applies to the run defense, where they're going to be like, okay, we're going to be an attacking front, and we're not always going to be able to stout against the run, but we'll be able to get a lot of negative plays, a lot of TFLs with the penetration. And will that be something that they can consistently rely on? We'll see. But whether it's the run defense, whether it's the secondary, whether it's the rookies, they're making a lot of bets here that are typically volatile bets. Rookies are not reliable. Rookies are not consistent. Secondary play was not consistent. The run defense, is that going to be consistent? So it speaks to a lot more volatility on the Falcons defense going into the season than the Falcons offense. And we'll see if the Falcons, can live up to whatever, right? We go into the season expecting the offense to be the strength of this team and the defense to be a relative weakness, but that could be flipped, particularly early in the season, where we've discussed all the reasons why the offense could get off to a slow start. And we know that typically in the NFL, defenses tend to get off to a faster start in the month of September. So, we might be going into the bye week, praising the defense, but this defense is far exceeding expectations and this offense is underachieving. Now, whether that continues to play out over the remaining, 13 weeks of the season, we'll have to sort of see, but that will be certainly a fascinating thing to keep an eye on. But let's talk more about the numbers in terms of the specifics of what this defense is going to be. Where do these rookies wind up? Will James Pearce Jr. or Jalon Walker, one of these rookies, lead the team in sacks? We'll get into all of that, guys, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So today's episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. When the NFL season around the corner, fantasy football is back. You can feel the buzz, right? The researching, the drafting, the building of championship squads. And if you haven't started or joined the league, right, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and check out Yahoo Fantasy. I am playing on Yahoo Fantasy this year, and you should too, whether you're a first timer or a veteran making your millionth league. And with the season quickly creeping up on us, Yahoo's giving you so many different ways to win. Try the brand new Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine League mode, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated weekly until one team is left standing. If you want to play instantly with your friends, try the new Draft with Friends mode. If you prefer the classics, get your crew together, go head to head in a private league. And if you don't have a crew, no problem. Join a public league. It's the easiest way to play. The NFL season kicks off on September 4th. So don't wait. Start your league today and draft now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. That's yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. So before we get into the statistical projections, I want to tell you guys about a survey that we're doing here over at Locked On. We want to hear from you. Tell us what you like, what you don't like, so that we can make your favorite shows even better. You can check it out at lockedonpodcast.com/survey. And everybody who fills and completes out a survey enters into a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. Thank you for your time. Now, when we're projecting these defensive stats, I did the offensive stats yesterday, talking about passing yards, rushing yards, receiving yards, all that stuff and more. With the defensive projections, I'm just really projecting, sacks and pressures, right? Part of the reason is because, I don't care about tackles. Neither should you. And interceptions to me is just kind of like uneducated guessing. At least I feel like trying to calculate how many snaps these guys are going to play and then what their pressure rate is and sack is at least quasi-educated guessing. So without further ado, let's get into some of these defensive stats. I do have the Falcons sack leader being Arnold Ebiketie with 7.5 sacks and 41 pressures this upcoming season, edging out James Pearce Jr. and Leonard Floyd, who I have each finishing with 6 sacks. Pearce is second on the team with 36 pressures. Floyd third with 30. Jalon Walker finishes fifth or tied for fourth with 4 sacks alongside Zach Harrison, who also has 4 sacks, but is fifth in pressures with 25 pressures, while Harrison edges him out with 27 pressures. Caden Ellis has 3 sacks, 24 pressures. Both Brandon Dorlus and David Onyemata finished with 2.5 sacks and 20 pressures. Ruka Roro has 2 sacks and 16 pressures. So, if you're watching us on YouTube and you're seeing the graphics in front of you, you might notice there's similar snap counts across the front for these guys. And a lot of that is based off of what the stated intention of the Falcons has been all summer, which is you get 4 snaps and then you get rotated out. And the Falcons are just constantly doing that. And so you see that reflected in my projection for these snap counts with a bunch of these guys in the 400, 500 range. In terms of snaps, I have Harrison and Arnold Bichetti leading the team with 550 and 529 respectively. Both Pearce and Floyd hit over 500. Onyemata, Dorlus, Ororo have between 412 and 452. I have Jalon Walker at 326. Part of that is because I am projecting Jalon Walker to miss some time with some of the injuries that that have been nagging him throughout the summer. And that's contributing to why some of the guys are, in the 400s versus the 500s. But it'll be interesting to sort of see if the Falcons maintain that. I think that's the stated plan going into the season. Will that maintain? Because a lot of that will be based off of, if guys are consistently producing when they're out there, they'll probably start getting more snaps. And if guys aren't, they'll start getting less snaps. But all in all, I kind of look at it and I think, a lot of these guys are going to get, between 25 and 32-ish snaps a game, at least to start the season. And that's why I kind of temper my expectations with some of the projections for James Pearce and his production, right? Like, let's imagine he's getting about 30 snaps a game. If 60% of those snaps are passing downs, that means he's only really going to get about 18 rushing opportunities per game. A typical first round edge gets a pressure rate of about 11%. So that's basically 2 pressures per game on 18 rushes, which would be 34 pressures across 17 games. If he converts 15% of those pressures into sacks, which is the standard in the NFL for edge rushers, that would be about 5 sacks for the season. And that's why you've heard me say multiple times where I think James Pearce is on track to be a quote unquote typical first round edge, which typically would be about 5.5 sacks, 30-ish, 33-ish sort of pressures. So that's kind of where I'm projecting him to be. And for him to get like 3 pressures on 18 opportunities, that would mean he would basically have to match Myles Garrett's pressure rate of like 17%, right? In order to convert, three pressures per game into 10 sacks, he would have to have a sack conversion rate of 20% or higher, which would basically put him on par with like Trey Hendrickson, who was like 21% last year. Nick Bonito, I think, led the league at 22% last year. So again, if you're projecting like a double-digit sack season for James Pearce, like, to me, based off of how much I think he's going to expect to play, you're basically projecting him to instantly be the best pass rusher in the NFL. And that's why I would temper my expectations in terms of Pearce's sack production going into the season. Now, you may also think, well, the Falcons are going to play him a lot more than what you're projecting him to play, which is possible. If he gets, 50 or so snaps a game and has more reasonable, pressure rates and sack conversion rates, and is getting 25 to 30 opportunities to rush the quarterback per game, then you could, I think, more realistically project 10 or more sacks. But again, you're essentially expecting him to double his snap count, which we'll see if that comes to fruition. But the way I sort of look at it, rather than one individual player having this monster year, I look at the combination of Jalon Walker and James Pearce. The combination of those two guys is adding, basically, based on my projections, 10 sacks and 61 pressures. And to me, that basically means that between the two of those guys, the Falcons essentially added a 10 sack guy, which to me is mission accomplished, right? And that's going to be the thing that I think takes the Falcons from a team that was 31st in sacks last year with 31 sacks to a team that could be closer to middle of the pack with over 40 sacks. I have them with 42 sacks, which should rank about 15th around league average last year. And I'm using rough estimates, looking at, if you're on your screens watching on YouTube, you'll see the percentile and then the approximate rank. The percentile is based off of where these metrics would finish over the last 3 years. And then the approximate rate is based off of, where that percentile is on a 32 team ranking. And so I projected the Falcons to score about 401 points, which would be the 10th best offense in most years based off of the last 3 years. I project them to give up 404 points, which would rank about 23rd. So I'm projecting a top 10 defense, barely, and a bottom 10 defense, barely, right? I'm projecting 6,257 net yards, which would be the 6th ranked offense most years. Net yards, basically subtracting sack yardage allowed. Net passing yards is about over 4,200, which would be about 5th in the NFL. Nearly 2,000 rushing yards in 1,991. That would be about 15th. Like I said on yesterday's episode, I'm thinking the injury to McGarry is going to cost you 300, possibly 400 yards this season. If you added 300 yards to the total, that would be approximately the 8th ranked rushing offense in the league. 400 would be the 5th ranked rushing offense. And to me, that's the difference between losing McGarry, where your league average versus a clear top 5 to 8 rushing attack. Adjusted net yards per attempt, or ANYA, our favorite passing efficiency metric. I have the Falcons at 7.2, which would be the 4th most efficient passing attack in the NFL, thanks to a really good year from Michael Penix. And so clearly, when it comes to yards, the Falcons have no problem based off of these projections to move the ball. I'm not expecting them to be as efficient in the red zone as their ability to move the ball in terms of yards is. Again, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about it because there's not really a whole lot to go off of. Like, they were very efficient last year in the final 3 games that Penix started, but 2 of those games that came against basically bottom 6 red zone offenses, and they were really good in those games. And then the one game against the Giants that was a above average red zone defense, they were not particularly good in that game scoring in the red zone. So it's like, again, and then it's Penix's first game. So we'll just sort of have to see what the red zone offense looks like, but we haven't spent a lot of time talking about it just because I don't know if there's a whole lot to really base it off of other than just I hope it works. Right. But as I said, 42 sacks, which would be about 15th every year. So that's where I have the Falcons stacking up against the rest of the NFL. Let's talk about where I have the rest of the NFL and record predictions for the other 31 teams. Who's the worst team in the league? Who's the best team that's going to be hoisting up that Lombardi? And we'll get into all of that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Now, the NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is going to make sure that you're ready for kickoff with this can't-miss offer. Right now, customers get $300 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. All you got to do is go on to the app right now, bet $5. If your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. And there's so many different ways to win, right? That's the beauty of FanDuel, right? If you feel really good about Bijan Robinson having a big game, hey, that's a player prop, right? If you're feeling like, hey, there's multiple things that can happen this week 1 game, hey, that's a same game parlay. Right? Baker's going to hit this many yards. Penix is going to hit this many yards, this many interceptions, all that stuff. Same game parlay is the way to go. So, make sure you check out all the different ways that you win by downloading the FanDuel app now and visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. And I also want to tell you about our proud sponsor, Upside. I've been telling people about Upside for years, trying to put all my friends and family on. Basically, Upside is going to give you cash back every time you fill up at the pump. You can download the free Upside app in the App Store or Google Play. It's very easy. It's legit, right? For me, my local gas stations that I like to fill up at give me 10 cents back a gallon. That adds up over time. If you're filling up, especially if you're a type of person that's filling up, on daily basis, every other day, multiple times a week, you get a couple of dollars back every single time you fill up, and that money adds up. I like to put them on Amazon gift cards. You can put them in your bank account, PayPal. There's other gift cards like Starbucks, AMC Theaters, Lowe's, Home Depot, all that stuff. So treat yourself by downloading the Upside app. See how much money you can get back, and they'll give you this limited time bonus of 25 cents per gallon back if you use the promo code Touchdown. Again, that's promo code Touchdown for that limited time 25 cent per gallon bonus. Offers vary by user and location. Go to upside.com for terms and conditions. So let's get into my NFL predictions. And I have the predictions on your screen over here at YouTube for all 32 NFL teams, thanks to playoffpredictors.com. Always a great resource for doing this. But basically, we'll just go over my playoff teams. The division winners I have, very chalky: Buffalo, Baltimore, Houston, Kansas City. The one definitive wild card I have is Denver, finishing with 10-7 record. And then I have 4 teams in the AFC that finished 9-8. That's New England, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, and Las Vegas. And based off of playoff predictors, tiebreakers, and my picks, Cincinnati and Pittsburgh will win those 2 tiebreakers and make the playoffs. So basically, based off of that projection, Cincinnati is the only new playoff team in the AFC this year. But I certainly, based off of this projection, a couple of things go differently. New England and Las Vegas could be also joining them as new playoff teams. In the NFC, again, chalky with the division winners, all the favorites over at FanDuel. Philadelphia, Green Bay, Tampa Bay, San Francisco. And then for the 3 wildcard spots, there's a 5-way tie with 5 teams finishing 9-8. For me, that's Chicago, Detroit, Minnesota, Atlanta, and the LA Rams. And based off of the tiebreakers, the 3 NFC North teams get in. And so that gives Chicago and San Francisco the new NFC playoff teams. Although, again, I think Atlanta has a shot. I know some of you guys think I'm down on the Falcons, but I'm like, hey, they'll be in it. They'll be in it in that Week 18 game. We'll be sitting there talking about, hey, we need this and that and this to happen, and maybe we got a shot. But we'll see how it goes. And so right now I'm only predicting 3 new playoff teams, which is very low by NFL standards. Last year I think we had 4, but the average since they expanded the playoffs has been like 6 new teams per year. So we'll see if someone else surprises us. But you also can see the playoff bracket on your screen. We'll talk about the final 4 teams in the AFC Championship. I have Baltimore versus Kansas City. NFC Championship game, I have Green Bay versus Philadelphia. I have Kansas City winning, Green Bay winning, and then those 2 teams meeting in the Super Bowl. And I have the Chiefs beating the Packers. And yes, I'm jumping on the Packers bandwagon because of the Parsons trade. I wouldn't have had them as a Super Bowl pick until that trade happened. And I do now because I think it's going to be that impactful for their defense. And, I'm not 100% sold on Jordan Love, but, when you potentially have a top 5 defense, I don't need Jordan Love to have to go out there and be perfect. He may just need to put together one good game for this team in January for that team to make the Super Bowl. So we'll see on that front. Very chalky picks for me. No real surprises, maybe a couple of surprises as you're looking at it. There will be certainly some surprise teams based off my projections. Like, last year I had Washington and I think Minnesota both winning like 5 and 6 games, and they both made the playoffs. And obviously Washington going to the NFC Championship game. It's like looking at my projections, I'm like, okay, what's going to be the 5 or 6 win team this year that goes on makes the playoffs and goes on a deep run? It'll probably be Arizona because I had them at like 6-11. Or some team like that. And then there's the opposite is being true. Like I had Cleveland and the Jets and the 49ers making the playoffs last year, and those teams fell well short of those expectations. So we'll probably get, a couple of other teams like that fall short of those expectations. So we'll see if my dart throws wind up being accurate. Though that's it for the 2025 season preview for the Atlanta Falcons. And we'll start getting into the nitty gritty, guys, tomorrow of this week 1 matchup. And we'll give you 3 days of previews with myself, James Yarko of Locked On Bucks on Thursday, on Crossover Thursday. And then, of course, we'll wrap up the week with Jarvis Davis, getting into the nitty gritty on Friday. So that is all still there for you. Continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen by checking us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And, of course, for your second listen, check out, if you're in the mood for more season previews, go check out the various season previews by division over at Locked On NFL. Who's going to win each division, who's going to be the surprise Super Bowl contenders. 8 episodes that are giving you everything that you need to know about this upcoming NFL season. It's all on Locked On NFL, which you can find on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And of course, make sure you check out that LockedOnPodcast.com/survey to give us your feedback on that. Again, it's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.